Yeah, I think we're ready to go. Welcome, everyone. This evening, this is NCAC. My name is Rand Cook, and this evening, Sarah Absher from the Community Development Department, Tillamook County, is going to share with us very specifically what the land use ordinance are here for Neskowin and explain kind of what that means and where we're going from here once we understand what they are.
That's right.
So,
Thank you.
Before we start, we have people introduce themselves both online and here.
okay,
Sure.
sure. We'll start right here. Go ahead, Guy.
Guy Figure, Neskowin, Hellman Way. Greg Smith, Neskowin.
Lynn McClunhan, Neskowin.
Gary Gillespie from South Beach Road.
Patty Bennett from Beach Crest.
Wyatt Angelo's Holly South.
I'm right to Holland now.
Tim Nelson, I'm a Neskowin resident.
Michael Schlichting, Neskowin.
Rand Cook, Slab Creek.
Online, anybody?
Who do you have online, Jeff? Could you get him to,
Oh, and I'm Jeff Weitzel, the secretary of the NCAC. How about the two Lyns, starting with Lynn Saxton?
Oh, second. Hi, this is Lynn Saxton. Sorry, I'd rather be there with you all. And I'm on the Community Planning Committee.
I'm Lynn Wintermute and I'm full-time resident on Hawk Creek Hills.
Nancy?
Nancy Vandell, bylaw subcommittee, and I'm a property owner on Neskowin Crest.
right, thank you all.
Tom Prohodich?
I'm Tom Prohodich. Neskowinian.
And proud of it. All right.
Or Neskowinite.
Candace?
Candace Miller, Neskowin full-time resident.
And then there's some people who are still muted, and I don't know, but so someone has SM as their screen name.
11.
11 online.
Oh, 11 online. Okay. Well,
We see.
we're gonna hear from them, or should we, we'll get the information,
Okay.
hopefully they'll let us
How
know.
about Rick Quirin?
Hi, this is Evelyn Zaba. I'm Rick's wife. He's just driving in and will join in the next maybe 10 minutes.
Fabulous. Tracy?
This is Michael Sipe. My wife Tracy is here with me online. We're property owners on South Beach Road.
And Mike and Tammy. Okay, maybe we won't hear from them. So that's everybody.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you all for being here, and no more delays. Sarah, get going.
All right. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to sit at the table for a minute. We're going to start by going over the zoning maps. So I have the zoning maps. Those of you that are in the room, everybody should have some copies. We might need to share Neskowin because of its length. I broke up into two sections. So you have the north half and then you have the south half. And then, hi, Scott, thank you. And then I'm going to go ahead and share because I also have these available for folks online to see. So I thought that a good first step would be for us to actually walk through your zoning maps and then dive into the ordinances.
Are you going to be projecting something?
I am not tonight,
Oh.
but I'm going to share some poorly drawn renditions with you as soon as I give the map presentation.
For your entertainment.
For your entertainment. Okay, all right. So for folks in the room, where I would like to start is, let's see, as soon as I get, why are those coming up? Let's see. Show all in this, there we go. Okay, we're going to start with the north half of Neskowin. So my question to the folks in the room is, can you tell which one is the north half of Neskowin by the map.
It's got a golf course in the middle of it, so a big green thing.
And you should be able to see Sahali. Tiny loop. Yep, all right.
that's that one.
Yes, it is. It's got kind of the reddish part. So I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in here. Lynn Saxton, because I can see you. Can you see my map?
I can. Yes, ma'am.
Can you see me moving it?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So let's go ahead and start with this map. So there's a couple of features I want to point out. Does everyone see where Highway 101 is? You can see the identification. It's where the blue zone and that reddish zone kind of merge, and you'll see Highway 101, and you can follow that up to the north. So in that area, everything that is blue and purple and dusty purple and green. Everybody see all those areas? Those are all areas outside of the Neskowin community boundary. Those are your rural residential zones. They're your small farm and woodlot. So we are not, the green is forest, makes sense, right? That's an appropriate color designation. So we're not going to talk about those zones tonight. So we're going to talk about the red one with Sahali is the Neskowin RR zone. So that means Neskowin rural residential. So that's one of the zones we're going to talk about tonight. And then moving down, so you see the turquoisey color, right where the golf course is. That is zone Neskowin recreation management. So Commissioner Seaver brought that up at a previous meeting that we had. We're going to talk a little bit about that zone. You can see that Neskowin RR zone really carries down through the community, right? See where that red goes? So we got a lot of properties on the east side of Highway 101 that are in the boundary in this area that have that Neskowin RR zone. Then you see kind of that brownish mustardy color. That is the Neskowin R1 zone, which is, I would say, the predominant zone of the Neskowin community. And that's the residential low density zone. The purple zoning, the dusty purple over on the west side by the ocean underneath Neskowin North, which you can see is that mustardy color, and by Hawk Street. That is recreation natural. That is the county's recreation natural zone designation. That is the former Kiwanda Beach development that that all of those plats were vacated. So that's the property the county owns. So I can visit with you a little bit more about that zoning as well. But what I would like you to note, so when we get down, kind of we're creeping into that central part of Neskowin, and you see where Pacific Overlook is. And
Sarah?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Quick question. On the Zoom meeting, the map is 2 inches vertical and 3 inches horizontal. Is it possible for you to expand the Zoom screen so that the map is, there we go.
Is that better?
Well, it's closer up, but the map itself is not getting bigger. It's like the screen needs to be expanded because the Zoom screen is much bigger than what the map is being portrayed on.
I have it fully full. I have it. I don't know, Jeff, if you can pop it out.
Well, it looks fine to me.
It looks fine to me too.
Okay, so it's my screen.
Are you using an iPad?
Oh, wait, I'm using a Mac.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you for saying something, Lynn.
Sorry.
So one of the things, no, it's okay. So one of the things that I would like everyone to pay attention to is the dusty purple that backs up to Pacific Overlook Drive, Hills and Neskowin there. And then it is going to that dusty purple. If you look real closely under tax lot 200, you'll see an SFW 20. I want you guys to remember that, okay? So that is a resource zone, just like the forest zone. And then I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. I'm gonna share again in just a moment. I'd like everyone to go to the second map, which is the south half of Neskowin. And I'm gonna go ahead and share again and pull that up. It's going to be, oh, let me see. And it's not going to. Let's see if I can get rid of this one. Pull these over. There we go. Okay. So now we are on the second half. Okay. So this is where everyone should see the continuation of Hawk Street at the top. You see more of the Neskowin RR, that red zone. You can see Sunbow Way. And this is where we start seeing village proper area, right? So you see more of that brown, and there's a lot of brown on that map that extends across to where we are with the old golf course. One of the things, again, just keeping an eye on that dusty purple, that SFW 20 that backs up to those zones, and then the green, which is the forest zone down there that butts up to the brown. What we also have is the yellow, kind of just up from Carlton. So that is a Neskowin R3. That's a high density residential zone. And that tangerine orangish color are your commercial zones in Neskowin. So you actually have two clusters of commercial zoning. The one you can see by Summit and there by Carlton. So on the west side of 101, that's where your market and your condos and the cafe is. But then by the golf course here, there's actually some commercial zoning east of 101. You can see that if you look at where it says Summit Drive, you can see how that commercial extends over, right?
It's the farmer's market.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
And if you look down and you keep going down the highway like you're going to South Beach, you will see that there is another cluster of commercial to the south and the southern end. And then you have more turquoise. You see the recreation the Neskowin RM zone, Neskowin Recreation Management. So that is, if you think about it, that's where you have a lot of your recreation areas for your beach. And I think that is Proposal Rock. It is also zoned Neskowin RM. You can see again, the green, the forest zone. And then as you go into South Beach, so all of South Beach is also zoned Neskowin R1. But if you notice that purple and that green butt up against South Beach Road and those properties in there. So just wanted to talk to you about your zoning maps. So what that means is Neskowin has several zones within their community boundary. Those include the RR zone, the R1, the R3, the commercial, and the recreation management. So we have quite a few zones here for this community. And then as you can see by the map zooming out, how much of the community on the east side is actually bordered by resource zoning. So that's your SFW 20 in that dusty purple, and then the green, which represents the forest zone. So, and then I have one more map for you. Let's see if I can, yeah. Okay. So then you see, if you have the yellow map, and we're not going to talk about the Neskowin Coastal Hazards Overlay Zone today, but I just wanted to give you an idea of where it falls within the village. As it goes down South Beach Road, it does pull in properties closest to the ocean, but it's the yellow border map. Do we need a couple of copies? And you can see, yep, the yellow border. So that is the Neskowin Coastal Hazards Overlay Zone. And you can see, does anybody need this?
No, we got it.
Got it? You want one, Mike?
I got it on my other.
So okay. So basically that runs and extends across one lot across breakers on the east side, if you want just kind of some context there. Okay, so any questions about the zoning maps?
Well, I just question, it's interesting, the beach,
RM. Who owns it?
The recreation natural,
Yeah, I mean,
the county owns the recreation natural.
in front of Proposal Rock.
Oh, no, not in front of Proposal Rock. The recreation management in front of Proposal Rock is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think technically the state owns that, but we zoned it. I think the state owns it, right? But we zoned it.
Okay, that's why I was curious, that
Yeah.
actually is not part of the beach, it's actually privately owned or publicly owned.
Publicly owned, right? So we do have zoning for publicly owned lands, right? Everywhere. So, because you recall when we did the land use session, there was a requirement at a certain point in time where the legislature required every piece of land be zoned. Right? And so that's where that came from.
But the beach is public.
The beach is
Right.
publicly owned,
Right.
correct? Mhm.
Sarah, is on the coastal Hadley overlay zone,
Mhm.
that was fixed by the Donnie line.
That's right.
So as they periodically do, they
Update lines.
update lines.
Mhm.
Does that take a measure 56 or anything
Yes.
for us to go with the update?
Yes, we would have to go through the entire process again. Which is why that line is a hard line. Mhm.
Sarah,
Mhm.
quick question on the ground zone by, on the,
Neskowin R1.
yeah, but it says F 2100 and 9241. It's north of the Yam Hill high density. It's this map.
Mhm.
What, is this R1?
The whole village essentially is zoned R1, except for that one piece. So let me
That
pull this in
area
Where the old
along
stables
there.
was, is that commercial?
where the old stables were. Hang on, I'm gonna pull up this map for
Looks like it on-
our folks
it looks like it might be.
online.
Oh,
Yeah.
Why is that not working for me now? Hang on just a sec, everyone online. I'm gonna try to get that map back up so you can see. So I believe, going off of memory, the old horse stables, are you talking about where someone built a house a few years ago?
No, the remodel.
Careful, not that old.
All stable.
So hang on, let me get this map back up for our folks online, so everyone has the opportunity to see what we're talking about here. Okay, hang on just a sec. Okay, so we're back up. Okay. So are you talking about? Where are we talking about?
It's probably around where that little green wedge is surrounded by the apricot wedge.
Okay, so there is a wedge that
That's the old
runs east of Hawk Street. Everybody see that? It's right here.
Yeah.
That's where that orange, that commercial zone comes in,
West of Fox Street.
Right, but there,
West.
you know,
east of Hawk Street.
Hawk Street. You have Hawk Drive on here, but I don't see Hawk Street until you get to Amity, when Hawk Drive turns.
It's on there that I wanted to create a map with enough context to where you had an idea of what your zoning districts
There.
look like.
Thanks.
So I promise you it is mapped there. I think that you can see that, and next to the R3 zone, which is yellow, you do see some Neskowin RM, the aqua color. I believe that is the OPRD parking lot,
Right, the what now?
the OPRD parking lot.
Okay.
OPR.
The Oregon Parks and Recreation, there's the wayside there. I think that is that island of aqua by the R3 zone.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the R3 zone is hybrid?
High density. Yes, we're going to go through that tonight.
And the high density area is, to my way of thinking, as dense as the rest of it.
I would agree with you. So the comment in the room was in looking at where the R3 zoning designation is for high density, that density is what is essentially carried out through a large part of the village. And I would say, yes, I would concur. And I think that is due to existing lotting patterns when all of these lots were platted several decades ago. Hardly any of them meet the 7,500 square foot minimum standard. Because there are lots of record, they were platted at the turn of the century or shortly thereafter, which has then fostered that denser development throughout the years because people could develop on smaller lots. Yeah.
We actually run solar breakers again here.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. So you can see where you're at. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions about the zoning maps? Anything anyone online would like to share? Any questions? Anybody have anything in the room?
I'm not, it's Jeff monitoring the chat.
Oh, Jeff, are you monitoring the chat?
I'm monitoring the chat and no one has chatted.
Thank you.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But okay.
Being very clear. That's good.
Okay, all right. So I am going to go ahead and let's see. I want to try to make this, I'm gonna pull this up to the owl and we can all see, right? Okay. And online, can you guys see? Look at that. Oh, it moved it. Okay.
It's
Nope.
very hit and miss whether the owl shows it.
Okay, so if I talk and I stand over here, is it getting?
We have a great view of your face.
Oh, gosh, that's not good. Okay. Oh, now you can see everyone in the room. Let me pull it back a little bit. Okay. How's that, Jeff?
Talks move a bunch, like wave your arms around, like you're drawing. It's not working. No, we just see all these lovely people.
Okay. All right, so I'm gonna try something else. I am going to switch from Harry to my webcam, which will still give us the sound. Ooh, how's that?
Maybe move it a little closer, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, hang on just a second. Let me.
That's right.
Okay. Hang on.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking such care for us, Sarah.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, all right. Oh, yeah, it's gonna work good. Okay, all right. So things for folks online might be a little blurry, but I will make big stroke.
They're behind you.
They're behind you.
Here.
Huh? Okay, so can everybody in the room see this? We good?
Yes.
All right, okay, so I want to start tying everything together that we've been learning. We talked about the statewide planning goals, right? There's 19 goals, all but one, goal 15, applies to Tillamook County. And what we did was then we talked about how the Tillamook County comp plan has to take all of the policies within these statewide planning goals to create our own land use plan and program for Tillamook County. And in that, under what goal, here comes the test, what goal is the community plan stored in? Neskowin plan. Goal 1 is citizen involvement. That's why we're here, so you're close. Goal 14, urbanization, right? Okay, so I know someone online have that. So the Neskowin community plan is in goal 14. But what we know is that we go from the statewide planning goals to the comp plan, and then we have the comp plan policies that are carried out through the Tillamook County Land Use Ordinance. Is everybody tracking? We're good, right? So we start here. Overarching statewide policies, drill down, take those policies and turn them into our program. And then we implement and administer those policies through local ordinance regulations, which is what we're talking about tonight. Those are those sheets you have. And those ordinances are outlined by each of the zoning designations. So, right, so that's why you have so many packets of paper. And I'm gonna try to share them online as we go through them, or at least just read aloud. But basically, every single one of the zoning designations that we just talked about has its own chapter. It has its own section in the ordinance. It's not one for everybody. So we go from the land use ordinance. So what matters to us tonight are the Neskowin ordinances. So all of our R1, R3, recreation management, commercial. We have our overlays. That is the Neskowin Coastal Hazards Overlay Zone. But we know other overlay zones apply in Neskowin as well, right? Like the flood hazard overlay zone, or like the beach and dune overlay zone, or the shoreland overlay zone. Those are all things we talked about in that training that not only are applied to Neskowin, but apply to various areas throughout the county. But because we're only talking about Neskowin tonight and these ordinances, we'll come back to those later. And then what everybody gets to use as part of the land use program are the supplemental standards. And some of those supplemental standards are required. That's where the requirements for geologic hazard reports can be found, is in those supplemental standards. That's where parking requirements are found, right? So there are some general standards that also apply everywhere throughout Tillamook County, including Neskowin. And there's a couple that I think you guys see most often, aside from parking and geohazards. There's the stormwater and erosion control requirements, right? So Neskowin has a stormwater and erosion control section. There's also a small lot exception for relief to setbacks on properties that are less than 7,500 square feet. So you have your zoning ordinance, which has a specific set of standards for development, setbacks, etc. But for smaller lots, the TCLUO, so the overall land use ordinance, actually has additional options for development that apply everywhere in the county and that can be exercised here. So we're going to go through those today as well, because I think that's really important. And I think it's important to acknowledge that they exist and how they exist, because these standards are often the, Sarah, why'd you prove that? Doesn't meet our setbacks. What happened? Well, there's some other areas in the ordinance that also apply that aren't in your local zoning codes. And so we're going to go through those tonight too. So we need to talk about those so folks know what those mean.
Sarah, could you say where the Neskowin community plan fits within that flow chart?
Yes, right here. So it's in the comp plan. So if you see, again, I'm just going to apologize now for all of my for renditions here, but we have the statewide planning goals. And from those, we created the comprehensive plan, and embedded in that comprehensive plan is the Neskowin community plan. And then both of these are in the TCLUO. And then through that then is where your specific standards and development requirements and your allowable uses for each zone are contained. But like we talked about too, everything, whether you go up the page or down the page, everything has to be consistent. You can't have policies up here and ordinances that are inconsistent with these policies. So like, I call it the ladder test, because if you think about going up and down the ladder, you have to have consistent rungs, and you have to be able to meet all of, touch all of the rungs going up and all of the rungs going down. And if you can't, there's a problem somewhere. So, okay, any questions about that? All right.
I do have one question about the supplemental standards. Are they
Yes,
in here somewhere?
they are not. I'm going to read them to you because it's 30-40 page document. And
Read them? You can read the whole.
I'm not gonna read them because they all don't apply. There are so many things in that article of the ordinance. Because again, that's that broad application. They apply everywhere, but I did bring a copy because I'm gonna read to you the sections that I think are relevant to what we're talking about tonight.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Any questions about this? Okay. Or ask me later. It's okay if you don't understand. It's not easy to digest. Okay, so let's start. I'll share with you what I shared with people that come to the counter that are looking at buying a piece of property. Because hopefully everyone comes and talks to us before they make a decision to buy something. or before they make a decision to develop. Right? Because we got a lot of really good information in our office that people need to know. Most people that come into our office are focused on what they can do, which makes sense, right? They're focused when they come in, what can I do? I want to do this, I want to do that, or what am I allowed to do? What does the zoning allow me to do? But what most people don't think about in those moments is, what are my neighbors allowed to do? Right? So think about it. You're looking at a piece of property and you want to know what you can do. But what a lot of people forget is to take a look at that zoning and the surrounding area to also realize what their neighbors are capable of doing. Typically, the most common question we get is, if I buy this property, can somebody block my view? Which I think is an absolute valid question. And I think in this community, especially, there's a lot of properties. That is a very valid question. And the first thing I do is I go to that zoning district and I say, they can do exactly what you can do. They have the same opportunities for setbacks and building heights. So potentially.
Yes.
Yeah, right. The only way to guarantee that the space around you does not change is to buy it. Right, and that's hard, and that can be a really hard thing to come to terms with for folks. But as we look at everything, you know, I know especially like we all think about how it relates to us and our properties individually, but this is where we also have an opportunity in talking about all of this to think about the people and the areas around us as well. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am.
Do CCNRs in the community and HOA, do they supersede these?
That's a great question. So I'm going to repeat it just so folks online hear. So the question is, in terms of CCNRs, do they supersede local zoning ordinances, and how do they all fit together? Is that right? Okay. You have to meet both. That is the short answer. You have to be able to comply with CCNRs and meet county regulations. The county does not enforce CCNRs because they're civil. So our job is to look at development based on what local zoning ordinances require.
Yes, CCNR.
Covenants, conditions, and restrictions.
Oh, okay.
Right, so you buy property in a certain area, they're gonna tell you
You can't paint.
you can't paint, or they wanna look at your paint color, you know, before you pick it out. So don't run to Sherwin-Williams yet, because they gotta decide for you first, which is fine. There's people, I live in one of those communities and I totally get it. But where it gets sticky is when a community regulated by CCNR, so I'll use the Holly as an example. They measure height differently. Their height standards and requirements are different than the county ordinances for height. Development has to meet both. And even though we don't enforce CCNRs, try to be a good community partner, right? I don't want anybody getting in trouble with anyone else, and I certainly don't want to get in trouble over something like a CCNR because we issued a permit. So in those areas, what I actually ask for is a letter from the HOA confirming that the development proposal actually also meets the CCNRs. And that's my way of making sure before I issue a permit, none of us are going to get into trouble, or at least not over those things, right? Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you? Okay. So let's go ahead and let's start. Let me get my stuff all together first. Let's start with the Neskowin RM zone. How about that? That sound good to everybody? Okay. The RM. Neskowin RM. Neskowin Recreational Management Zone. Okay. So we're going to go quickly through and I will read these for the benefit of everybody on the meeting. We have uses permitted outright, uses permitted conditionally. So those are on the first page. And then on the second page are the standards, which means what your development requirements are. every zoning section, every ordinance section follows the same structure and format. It always starts with purpose. It starts with uses permitted outright, uses permitted conditionally, development standards. So what it's for, what you can do, what you might be able to do, and then what you have to comply with to do it. Okay? Okay, so uses permitted outright in the Neskowin RM zone. So this is the golf course, right? Remember those aqua blue areas that we saw on the map? So outright means that zoning and building permits can be issued. It is maintenance and operation of existing facilities and structures. Recreational improvements and additions necessary to serve the same numbers and densities of visitors served by the existing facilities, provided that off-site impacts are not increased. Such facilities include picnic areas, playgrounds, pavilions, maintenance buildings, tennis courts. We need to add a pickleball court and whatever that game is y'all play at the golf course, and swimming pools. Yep. So basically, you outright in this zone, you can add accessory structures or accessory uses that enhance the primary use that's already there. So let's talk about the golf course. If the golf course wanted to add a new maintenance building, they could do that with zoning and building permits, but there's no special land use review to do that. If they wanted to do repairs or additions to the clubhouse, they could do that. But here's the catch. Provided that off-site impacts are not increased. So what does that mean? What do you guys think that means?
No casino.
No casino. Well, I don't know. You throw in a few slot machines. You know, parking, traffic. Traffic is the big one, right? So when I look at some proposals, I'm gonna call Chris Lady, who's the director of public works and a traffic and a transportation engineer, and say, hey, golf course is looking at doing X, Y, or Z. Do you think that this has the capacity to increase traffic? Is this drawing more people? And I'm going to rely on him and his professional opinion to tell me what he thinks.
So Sarah, speak to the fact that most, the whole golf course is in a flood hazard.
It is.
So if, when you say that they can build a structure, and given the most recent,
Yep, we're not gonna get into that tonight, though.
I know we're not gonna get into it tonight, but.
It's coming. We're gonna have that conversation later in here.
Yeah, but even before, let's, in general.
Yeah.
Like to speak about what it is to build in a flood area.
Yeah, so the flood hazard overlay zone, so the golf course and to Guy's point, the clubhouse and other improvements on the golf course are in the flood hazard overlay zone. It's all map flood. Right now, as of today, being in that overlay zone does not limit use of the property. It tells us how we have to build. You have to elevate, you have to have venting, right? All those things. So that's what the overlay zone does. It doesn't determine what uses are allowed in the zone. It tells us how we're going to develop, in addition to the standards that are in that RM zone section. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. But what Guy is referring to is that last week, the county got a new letter from FEMA. So one of the things that we have been working on is the biological opinion that was rendered for the state of Oregon. That is a whole other topic that I will come back and be talking to you all about very soon, because it is going to change our flood program. But
You can't do a quick.
Bring a comment.
I cannot do it quick.
It's not quick.
It's not
They're
quick.
shooting to accomplish this by the end of the year. August 1st.
Some things.
Yeah.
So, yes, but, we're gonna need to call a special meeting for that.
Yeah.
Okay, but for purposes of today,
Yeah.
we need to focus on what our ordinances say so we can work on our community plan. So we're gonna pretend right now that doesn't exist. which for me is delightful. Because it is all I've been doing all day and since last week. Okay, so it's okay, I figured it would come up. All right,
But
okay,
in general, I want to do the.
yeah,
Say,
yeah.
there are overlay zones sometimes that impact development.
Totally, the shoreland overlay zone, we talked about that, right, Neskowin?
Right.
It talks specifically about Neskowin in the shoreland overlay zone in those sections. So there are, to Guy's point, he's right, there are overlay zones that also add layers to how you can develop and how you must develop a piece of property. But one thing, number two, did you guys know that utility lines, excluding power transmission lines, are also allowed outright? That means if PUD wants to come in and put up a bunch of new overhead utility lines, which nobody likes the overhead ones, right? They can. That is allowed in this zone. Fish and game management, that's a no-brainer. That makes sense. So use is permitted conditionally. The golf course, should they choose to do so, could pursue an opportunity to put a campground on the property. I'm not starting rumors, I'm just using that as an example.
I'm on the board with it.
Okay, so you heard me. Okay, so use is permitted conditionally. These mean that these may be allowed, but there's criteria, there's a process to determine that. And that's something we're gonna go over later because it's important for you all to understand what criteria are for different reviews. So use is permitted conditionally, permitted campgrounds and group lodging facilities such as dormitories for visitors, but not including commercial motels, hotels, or group cottages. So if someone bought a house next to the golf course or is thinking about it, I want them to read this, because if the golf course chose to do something, they could come back to me and say, why is this happening? And I can say, well, because the zoning may allow for it, right? So it's important, again, it's important to know what's around you. Single or multiple unit dwellings or residential quarters for caretakers and staff members necessary to serve the existing facility. So if the golf course said, we've got ground maintenance people, you know, you got all these great people working at the golf course, you need them to operate, they have nowhere to live. Y'all decide you want to put up a couple of bungalows or cabins for them. You might be able to do that. Marinas and mooring areas, primary wood processing. So there's industrial opportunities in this zone potentially. And those get a little noisy. Water treatment facilities and sewage treatment plants. Utility substations and power transmission lines. Towers for communication, wind energy immersion systems, or structures having similar impacts. Let's say golf course, memberships down, not making the financial, you know, threshold to operate the golf course, and you decide to put up a bunch of solar panels to help offset costs and get more income. You might be able to do that. And then sometimes there are recreation management zone properties that don't want to do recreation management, but somebody may buy one and want to put a house on it. And we do see this in different areas. There's some in Sand Lake area. There's a couple north of Rockaway Beach that are zoned recreation management where you could potentially put a dwelling on the property and not use it for recreation management purposes at all. So let's say there's no flood on the golf course, no wetland biological habitat, no anything. Let's just say it's flat and dry. Someone could potentially come in and subdivide that area into 5-acre parcels and put homes on them with the way this recreation management zone is designed. So it's obviously not going to happen, but it's really something to think about when you think about what are the allowable uses in the zone.
So we could do that on our RM property in the back.
In the RM, do you have RM or R1? I think you're R1.
RM.
You have RM back there?
R1 and RM.
Yeah, potentially. So, point being.
Sarah,
Yes.
quick question.
Mhm.
On the county or the statewide level, is anyone tracking the rate of increases in these various zoning categories? I mean, what's the adjustment mechanism for lands? This is not a Neskowin question. This is just something I'm curious about. But what is the rate of evaluating how quickly the existing zone designations are being used or developed? Is there any development rate growth is, I guess, my bottom line.
The only time the state tracks that is in farm and forest zones.
Okay.
And you know, what I would say too. Is you have your outright permitted uses and your uses permitted conditionally. The uses listed conditionally in this zone and others. There's already been an analysis. To determine that they are most likely consistent. With the comprehensive plan policies of the county's ordinance and your community plan. So I'm gonna say that one more time. Some of you may look at these uses permitted conditionally and go, no way. Right? Which is okay. That's a normal reaction. That's natural. We're all finding out new things tonight. But the reason why these are listed is because at some point in time, there was a determination made that these uses were most likely consistent with comprehensive plan policies. Okay, we may not all feel that way today. I'm sure folks didn't all feel that way when the zoning designations were done. But should we try to remove any of them, it could be perceived as a property takings, which puts the county at risk for getting sued. So if we were to monkey with any of this, I would have to do what's called a Measure 56 notice to advise all landowners that own property in this zone or one of the other zones that the county is considering a change that may impact their property rights and their property values. So we have to be very careful about when we decide what we're going to add or propose to take away from zones, what that looks like because of that takings issue, but also anything like if we took something out of this, we would have to explain why it was no longer consistent with comprehensive plan policies. Yes, Wyatt.
I'm a little puzzled about how the interface between the community plan and the land use ordinance would take place, because if in fact, for instance, the community plan viewed a use as inconsistent with the plan for the community, but it's still permitted under a conditional use, how would the county resolve that issue?
So these zoning designations were created and adopted when the community plan was adopted. So that discussion took place. And the reason why these are all here is because it was found that they were consistent with the community plan policies and the comp plan.
As the community plan changes or morphs, and then what its next iteration will be, does that flow into the land use ordinance as well?
It could potentially, but then that gets back to looking at this in the broader context of property takings, property rights. We would have to have good reason as to why those uses were no longer consistent, not only with the Neskowin community plan policies, but the comprehensive plan and statewide planning goals. So it goes everywhere. Right. Okay.
So Sarah was, sorry, this is Nancy. Was there a change around 2014 that affected some of these zonings then? One of these 56 things?
So it was the implementation of the Neskowin Coastal Hazards Overlay Zone.
Okay.
Which was that yellow. And there were a lot of years and a lot of data that went into that. And there is that change, and property rights continues to be an ongoing conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a most recent court decision that was actually made on that. So a decade later, we have continued to work through that. So those changes do not come easy, and the implications of those can linger for years.
So even if it was outside of the tsunami zone, it still could have impacted some of the properties outside of the tsunami zone.
The coastal hazards overlay zone, it was selected as part of some of the tsunami hazard zones that the GOMI at that point in time had determined, along with the bluff back hazard areas up South Beach. But when the county adopted those lines based on Tagami data, those lines now became static. So to Guy's point earlier, if Tagami changes the lines, the lines for purposes of that overlay zone do not arbitrarily move.
Thank you.
But one of the, and why it's one point, one of the reasons why we were able to propose the coastal hazard overlay zone and defend it is because of safety of people and property. I mean, that was the argument over and over. What we were doing was protecting lives, protecting property. Based on what the science said and what Dogami and others outlined. In a similar way, we now have a housing crisis. We have a need for housing, and you wonder, and I've been looking at ways in which, let's say, for any of the R1 or R3 zones, the purpose of the zone primarily is for housing. And is there a way that we could word our community plan, comp plan, filter down? I know that we get into ordinance issues that puts a priority on housing within housing zones for the purpose, for the broader purpose that we've already identified as a county.
So that's a great question, and how we prioritize that is to make them uses allowed outright. That's
Which
how
is
that's
where,
done.
which is the measure, and that was the state.
Senate Bill
Senate Bill
6.
comes.
Yes, exactly. So that's how we prioritize uses based on what's allowed outright. So when you see uses listed as uses permitted outright, those are the priority.
But it doesn't preclude the uses that are allowed conditionally unless, if they meet the 6 criteria.
Correct, but here's the thing with that. Think about all of the statewide planning goals. Urbanization, public facilities and services, wraparound services. That's why you see a lot of those uses listed conditionally, is because there are areas you might need them, like a school. You'll hardly ever see a school allowed outright in the zone. But you will see it listed conditionally because there's an acknowledgement, even in resource zones, that schools are a service and a community need that is needed everywhere. So then basically what a conditional use means is it's reviewed on a case by case basis, property by property. So it's specific to the property. And a lot of that is to assess those potential offsite impacts like traffic or other things. So let's move on to the RR zone. So I want to make sure we get through this one, and the R1 zone are probably the most important ones tonight. Okay, so the Neskowin rural residential zone. This is not to be confused with the county's rural residential zone outside of your community boundary. They are two different rural residential zones. So you have one in your boundary, and then we have some outer lying areas that are also zoned rural residential. But because Neskowin is an unincorporated community, there are urbanization rights that that those properties in Neskowin and the boundary are entitled to, that the county's rural residential zone properties are not. One of the biggest ones is sewer, right? We had a lot of conversation about sewer when we did the land use training. So what does this mean? Uses permitted outright in the Neskowin RR zone: single family dwelling, mobile or manufactured home. So when it says meeting the standards of section 5.160, those are supplemental standards in the ordinance that apply to the siting of any mobile home in the county. So basically you have to have tie downs. You have to have some sort of blocking or skirting, right? They have to have oftentimes a pitched roof. You have to have a small storage structure to go with them of at least 64 square feet in size. So there's additional requirements for those things that are contained in that section. So a recreational vehicle can be allowed during the construction or placement of a use of which a building permit or placement permit has been issued. So what that means is, and this applies to every residential zone, sometimes people are building their own homes. That's really important to a lot of folks to be able to do that. You can live in your RV on the property while you build your home. That's what that means, but you have to have a building permit and be building to live in the RV on your property, right? So there's, and then the RV use of living in your RV is gone when your certificate of occupancy is issued. It can take quite a few years to build a house. So I will tell you, in some areas, we see folks in that RV for a long time because it can take them 5 years to build their home. But they can live in the RV while they build. Home occupations are allowed outright. So that says subject to the provisions of section 4.140. That's where your parking and your other provisions are also embedded. So not in the Neskowin zone. But what that means is, and you'll see later on, home occupations are allowed both outright and conditionally in each zone. Which means that I basically have to decide whether the home occupation warrants public notice to the neighbors, or if it is small in scale to where it's not going to have an impact to the neighbors and I can allow it outright. So a couple of examples. Someone is an artist and they paint and they draw and they sell their art. They sell most of it online. But every once in a while, they have a little gallery in the back of their home and somebody comes to buy or look at one of their paintings. They have small signage, no more than 6 customers a day. Most of their work, most of their selling, they're doing online. That could be allowed outright. Anybody familiar with Bayside Surveying? Out of Tillamook, Bayside Surveying, Terry Jones? Yeah, okay. Mr. Jones ran his survey office as a home occupation. But we knew there would be more traffic. We knew there would be more trucks and deliveries. We knew there could be noise, right? We knew there were other impacts that could generate from that type of a home occupation, just based on the nature of the work and who else would be coming to talk to him at his office. So that one we required public notice for. Somebody's an accountant, they're running a small practice out of their home. It's seasonal, it's a couple of folks a day that may be coming. There really aren't any deliveries or anything. That could be allowed outright. So it just kind of depends. If there are enough neighbors, so let's say I say, okay, this is allowed outright. I'm going to give you a zoning permit and you can do your home occupation. Then I start getting concerns from neighbors. Sarah, there's a lot of traffic. Sarah, there's this, there's that. It's disrupting the neighborhood. I can go back and decide there were greater impacts than initially thought, and then take them through a public notice process. So it kind of depends. There's a lot of things that can be a home occupation, but the rules for running a home occupation are in that supplemental section because they apply to anybody in the county that's running a home occupation. Farm uses, including aquaculture and forest uses, are allowed outright. These are larger tracts. It is acknowledged that there are some areas in Neskowin that may want to have a farm. And farm use is defined by statute. It's not just dairy cows. That's what we see the most of. So that's what a lot of us automatically, think about. It could be beekeeping. It could be growing vegetables or flowers for a flower farm. Like there's all kinds of things that a farm use can be. It does not even have to be cow related. So there's that. Roadside stands for produce grown on the premise. So you'll see, I think it's at Farmer Creek Road and a few other places that could happen in your Neskowin or our zone. So somebody had a little farm stand.
So does the forest uses, does that include harvesting?
It does. Which under the Oregon Forest Practices Act, it can happen anyway. Right? And you'll see that people will harvest forests to the areas before they turn it into a development. Signs. So sometimes somebody wants to put a sign up, maybe lease a space for a sign. Electrical distribution lines. So again, this gets back to PUD. You're going to see a lot of utility infrastructure outright and conditionally in zones because we have to have infrastructure. We have to make sure we have opportunities for water, sewer, and electricity. So uses permitted conditionally, planned developments. So that does not increase the density. But what a planned development means is that you can cluster lot sizes, make smaller lots. Let's say you've got some wetlands or some steep topography. You can cluster improvements so that you are avoiding those other areas. It gives you some flexibility, but there's other rules that come with that. Right now, a duplex is allowed in the RR zone as a use permitted conditionally, as are cottage industries. You could potentially cite a recreational vehicle without a home. Churches and schools, so that gets back to that conversation about community services. You can do a shop without a house. You can do nonprofit community meeting buildings. So if the golf course decided that somebody out at Neskowin our zone piece of property and they wanted to put a community building up there. Fire or ambulance stations, which again goes back to the public facilities. So as you can imagine, those are wildly unpopular by neighbors. I have had to take a couple of them through conditional use processes. What do you think is one of the first things people don't like about having a fire station or an ambulance station by them?
The siren,
The sirens, the alarms, the traffic day and night. Somebody comes to me, Sarah, I'm looking at this piece of property, it's zone Neskowin RR, can I build a home? Yes, you can. You might want to look at the whole thing. Right? Animal hospitals, golf courses, towers for communications, small scale primary wood processing facilities. So this is where some of those light industrial uses that can also happen on rural lands outside of the county are allowed. Along with a bed and breakfast and a residential care facility. So let's talk about the standards. We're going to jump down to 4 on this one. Okay. So under standards, it says the minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet, but it does acknowledge that where sewer is not available, Chris Keola in our office. So we're going to run by, partition proposals with him in these areas. He may say a bigger size is required so that those properties can accommodate septic system improvements, including a repair area, right? And your backup drain field area. Parcels less than 20,000 square feet that were legally established prior to June 17th, 1982 may be built upon, provided all other requirements of this ordinance are met. So basically what that means is if you've got a 10,000 square foot property and it is a lot of record, you can build a house on it. It talks about lots in preliminary subdivision plats. May be built on. So there's some things in here. The first thing that these are always going to do is tell you what your minimum lot size requirement is for uses. But when it comes to building a home, and we talked about this with Senate Bill 406, it doesn't matter the size of the property. It can be less than the minimum lot size as long as it's a lawfully established lot of record, right? So then the minimum lot width and depth requirements are supposed to be 100 feet. Again, that does not apply to existing parcels, but what that applies to is when someone wants to divide. Then that becomes very important. And then the creation of new parcels, we talk about sewer availability again, and we talk about on-site sanitation systems. One thing that's unique about the Neskowin zones that other zones don't have is that the Neskowin zones explicitly require confirmation of water service availability from the water district prior to development. That's office practice anyway. We have to know before we issue a permit that utility services are available, but Neskowin explicitly calls that out. One of the other things about Neskowin that's unique is letter G, and this is again in all of your residential zones. It says driveway connections to the street shall be limited to 25% of the street frontage of a lot, but not less than 12 feet. And here's the caveat. Unless the Tillamook County Public Works Department or ODOT, which is the Oregon Department of Transportation, requires a different width. Okay, so let's talk about this. All right. So what does this mean? We have a lot. And for purposes of easy math, we're going to say it's 100 by 100, which actually fits the minimum lot size requirement of the zone for dimensions. But we all know that 20,000 square feet and 100 by 100 square feet are two different numbers, right? So it has to meet both. The dimensions have to be at least 100 by 100, and you have to hit that 20,000 square foot threshold for new lots. Okay, so we're going to do this with this zone, and then it'll apply to the others. Okay, so you have, it says driveway connection to the street shall be limited to, let's do it up here. So here's our street. Okay. driveway connection to the street shall be limited to 25% of the street frontage of the lot, but not less than 12 feet. Okay, so 25% of 100 is what? 25. Okay, right, so technically in this area, you could have 25 feet. And then it can actually taper in. So that would be your maximum. Or you can do no less than 12 feet, right? So that means at a minimum, you have to do 12. So it's 25% up to 25%, but no less than 12. So if you have a 25-foot wide lot, you're at 12. Does that make sense? Because you can't go below 12. You can go up to 25%, but you cannot go below 12. So in some of those narrower lots, so even like, let's say a lot is 30 or 40 feet wide, which is not uncommon for the village, and you have a 2-car garage, right? So 25% of 40 feet is what, 10 feet, but you can't go below 12. But that's also not big enough for 2 cars, right? So let's say this is 40. You have to be at least 12, but that's not enough. So you'll see that. And in fact, it only says the connection. So when people are concerned about how driveways work, it doesn't say the whole driveway. It says that part that connects, the driveway connection. So this could be very small. And then oftentimes what you'll see is that just right outside the property line. We did do a variance to this. I've done one variance to this driveway connection width requirement, and it was in South Beach, and it was because one of the lots that was being built had like a tree and this weird knoll, and the house sat on top, but the owner like couldn't maneuver that corner between the knoll to get up to her house in her steep driveway. And the fire department couldn't get up there either. And so that we did grant a variance for, to give her a wider connection than 12 feet. So that she and others, including the fire department, could safely get up that driveway approach. So thinking about our streets in the village, which are all under public works, right? So you get a road approach permit. Public Works may say, we know you have to be 10, at least 12, but no more than 25%. But due to line of sight, topography, trees in the way, whatever it could be, without going through a variance, they could tell me, Sarah, well, we want this to be 15 feet wide. Because this says that Public Works can determine that connection width as well. So something to keep in mind. Okay, so that's going to play out in all of your residential zones. So the question, so as we look at these standards, because these standards don't impact one's ability to develop their property. It's not a use requirement, it's a construction requirement. So what I would like the committee and others to think about is that language relevant? Has it accomplished what you wanted it to accomplish? So when you're walking around the neighborhood and you're looking at things and you're looking at people's driveways and looking at parking configurations, has it done what the expectation was? Should it be changed? And if so, what do we think that should look like?
And changes to the standards does not require a 56 numbers.
It can. So like if we wanted to change building heights, yes. But ultimately, they're typically easier to do because we're not saying, we're not taking away a use.
Right.
Right? Okay. So here's everybody's favorite. This is the building, the lot coverage requirement. Okay, so I need to connect that with the definition. So I also brought a copy of the county's definitions. So Article 11 in the county's ordinance, it's one of the last sections of the code, contains several definitions. And I found over the years, sometimes it misses definitions I think that should be in there. And other times I am stunned because it includes definitions for things I don't think it would. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what the definition of lot coverage is. Okay. Lot coverage is the area of a lot or parcel, let's say property, covered by a building or buildings expressed as a percentage of the total lot area. So it is an area of the lot covered by a building or buildings. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, I bet you're all dying to know what the definition of building is, aren't you? Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. I just brought a section of the definitions. So I'm reading you before we talk about lot coverage. I'm giving you what the definition says. Okay, so in terms of lot coverage, it's building or buildings. We good on that? Okay. So what is the definition of a building? Okay. A structure built or used for the support, shelter, or enclosure. Okay. A building is a structure for support, shelter, or enclosure of persons, animals, I always say this word, chattels, what is it, CHA? Thank you. Or property of any kind. So for persons, animals, that word, and property. So it is a structure built or used for the support, shelter, or enclosure. What do you think is not counted for lot coverage?
Decks.
If we go by the word, that is correct. And I will tell you, we actually include decks in lot coverage calculations in Neskowin. I think there was a director one time who did not, and I still hear about it today from the neighbors. We won't say where. Retaining walls. Retaining walls are not included in lot coverage. And most of the time, they're subgrade. If we counted retaining walls, that would change everything for everyone. That could impact retaining walls as part of transportation improvements or stabilization of properties on cuts and fills. So we do not include retaining walls in that definition. What lot coverage also does not include. So if we go back to lot coverage, it only refers to buildings or buildings expressed as part of whatever. So it does not include impervious surfaces. Right? So oftentimes people will pour concrete patios because, you know, maybe the building itself covers a lot to that to meet the 70%. So they don't have a way to build anything else, but they'll do a patio of concrete or pavers. So our lot coverage maximums for Neskowin only refer to buildings.
Only refers to what?
Buildings,
But now with the FEMA thing, impervious surfaces are gonna be.
right? So there's that, but, okay, so I will say this, with Senate Bill 406, and again, asking you as a community, with your expectations of lot coverage review, do you want it only to pertain to buildings? Outside of flood areas, do impervious surfaces matter to you? Meaning, do you want to see concrete patios poured up to property lines? Because they don't fall under setbacks either. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a separate definition in the land use ordinance for building?
Nope, just that one. It's buildings and structures. It is a terrible definition and I struggle with it all the time.
Sir, if Neskowin wanted to allow for an ADU, a separate structure on a lot, that would in fact cover more than the percent lot coverage allowed. And we decided that if it was an ADU used for that purpose, that Neskowin would allow it just to increase the housing opportunities. What do you think?
Well, we did it already. The ADU ordinance excludes lot coverage maximums. It still has setbacks, distance between structures, but that was one of the incentives.
So we haven't had one of those yet. have we?
No.
Planning commission, okay.
Okay,
Good.
all right, so now we're all aligned on, maybe not what our definition of lot coverage should be, but we're all aligned on what the ordinance says, right? Because that's what I gotta go by, is what the ordinance says. All right,
Sarah, I gotta go. Oh, I'm gonna call you tomorrow. I apologize.
that's okay.
Oh, wait, is this yours?
No.
Okay,
That's, thank you for that.
You can take it.
talk to you later. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about how this works in Neskowin. So it says structures shall meet the following roof standards. And structures are lumped into that terrible definition of building, just so we're clear. Applicants shall demonstrate compliance with these standards on submitted plans. So that means on their site plan, whatever it is, they gotta put it on. For purposes of these standards, building depth is defined as the dimension of the building footprint measured between the front and rear setbacks. And the building width is defined as the dimension of the building footprint measured between side property lines. So let's start with a square piece of property again, because it's easy. Okay, we're gonna keep using that 100 by 100 because then we all don't have to think too hard about that. Okay. So we have 100 by 100. Okay. So the first thing we have to do is identify the front and rear property lines and the sides. And on a square lot, that's easy to do. Okay, so let's say we have a street here. And then there's a lot here, and a lot here, and there's a lot here. And a lot here, right? So somewhere down here is another street, you know, because this is common, you'll see blocks of lots, and then they're sandwiched by two roads, right? Okay. Definitions. The front property line is the shortest property line abutting a street or private way. And I'm pulling all these from Article 11 in the ordinance, some of them after a couple of decades I've got memorized. So this is the only property line abutting a street or private way. So this is our front, right? Rear, in this case, is defined as the most distant and opposite. Rear, right? And everything else is a side yard. Okay. So the directions are, for purposes of these standards, building depth is defined as the dimension of the building footprint measured between the front and rear setbacks. So this is depth, and width is defined as the dimension of the building footprint measured between side property lines. Okay, so let's do an easy one first. Okay, here's our building footprint. Square lot, square footprint. And the ocean's over there, so we have a nice little deck there. Maybe some stairs. It's a two-story structure. Let's stick with the square. So we have to measure this way. And we have to measure this way, right? Building depth, front and rear, building width, side to side. So if the lot is 100 feet deep, and based on your lot coverage of 70%, what is the maximum depth of that building footprint? 70 feet. Okay. So what that means is that this cannot be more than 70 feet long. We can go from here. If we include the deck, we don't measure this, it would be from here to here. Because it's only where the building covers.
So the deck
This is
isn't
empty
included,
space.
the deck isn't included.
Well, what I would do in this case is this is my longest line of thorough coverage. So if I measure from here to here and it doesn't meet 70 feet, then I know no matter where else I measure on this property, I'm not gonna exceed 70 feet. Because I'm gonna actually try to measure based on the area, the line where there's the most lot coverage. Because I know if I measure that line this way, that I have gotten my deepest dimension in relation to the depth of the lot. Okay. Same thing going sideways. So we're 100 feet wide. So what can this be? 70 feet. That's right. Now, here's the interesting thing about this before we make this harder. You don't need a building permit to put up a shed, right? As long as it's less than 12 feet high, 200 feet, square feet. If people call our office and actually ask us, we will remind them of the lot coverage maximums in Neskowin. Because even though building permit isn't required, that provision stays, right? That lot coverage is still there. Unless you call me and tell me somebody's done that, and you're concerned that they may have exceeded that lot coverage, I'm not going to know. And I'm not telling you all to tell on your neighbors. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that I think that sometimes there's this thought that it's right here, she's not doing anything about it. Well, folks, I might not know. Right? I might just simply not know. We talked about the bears in Neskowin. One of the things to me that is more of a benefit than a lot coverage issue is if somebody wants to put a small trash enclosure on their property for their garbage can. If it is if it's like 3 feet by 3 feet and 4 feet tall or whatever, it's just enough to put your garbage can in there. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not gonna count that in your lot coverage because I know how bad y'all need them, right? So just some practical application of those rules. Now, if this is 12 by 12 and you're gonna put kayaks and a few other things in your garbage cans in it, we're gonna talk about that, right? Because that's entirely different. So the ordinance does give me some authority to be flexible in application. Trash enclosures, I think, are important to the community. I'm going to try to be flexible on that as long as I can come to you and say it was 3 feet by 3 feet and 4 feet tall. It's obvious it's just enough for a garbage can. You don't want the bears in there. So that's the basic. Now, where it starts getting interesting is if the house does that. Right? So now, here is our exterior building footprint. And how I find this is by looking at the foundation plan of a home. So I'll look at the site plan because the site plan should have the building footprint on it. But how I verify that is by going to the foundation plan as well. Because sometimes the foundation plan footprint and the site plan don't match each other. They can be different. And so then what I'll do for purposes of lot coverage is ask the architect or the property owner, whomever, can you fill this in on the site plan? I need something that has comprehensively all of the coverage. Because here's the other thing, it includes cantilevered portions of structures. It does not have to be touching the ground.
But that wouldn't be shown in the foundation.
That's exactly right. So then I'm like, can you please put that in for me, because I need that, right? And not only do we have to pay attention to lot coverage, but they also have to meet setbacks, right? Because we've all got setback standards too, so it's not either or, it's both. So if this is 20 feet, and this is 5, and this is 20, and this is 5, they have to meet lot coverage maximums and setbacks. It's both. Which oftentimes when you see lots where people really want to maximize their building footprint, we have sent more plans back to adjust building footprints to meet those maximum lot coverage requirements than anything else, because they'll pay attention to the setbacks, but they forget about the lot coverage. And those are two very different things. You can meet setback requirements and not meet and exceed the lot coverage maximum for the zone. So it's both. So in this case, I verified all my setbacks are met. How I'm going to measure this for depth is this is going to be my line. Does that make sense to everybody? Because this is where there is the most lot coverage, right? Likewise, I'm going to measure here. Because I know if those 2 points don't exceed 70 feet, the rest of it is fine. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So let's say they want an art studio here. And we've also decided we want a 300 square foot she shed over there. I would want that. Okay. I already have this. I have to add this. Likewise, this way, I have to add this, and now I have to do this. And I've got to make sure those two together do not exceed 70% here. And that when I measure this and this, that those also do not exceed 70% of the lot coverage. Somebody wanted to build an awning, a connector. I don't want to run in and out of the rain in my she shed from my house. Now I also have to count that. Okay, so that's how your lot coverage works. Where it gets tricky is if you have an irregular shaped lot, or if the house sits at an angle with the property lines. And then we have more work to do because these perpendicular measurements do not get that easy. So like up by the saddle, right? You have those kind of triangular-ish shaped lots.
Pie shape.
Pie shape, pies. Yeah, you got a pie up there. Yeah. It takes a little more work. And sometimes it can take work to identify the front or the rear yard, right? Because that's where it all starts, is where your front and rear yard are. Because you have to figure out where your points are to measure your building depth and your building width. And if there is no distinct rear yard, we actually have to create a hypothetical line. And then that's where setbacks and that lot coverage are measured from. But it is footprint ratio to land area ratio. That's probably the biggest takeaway today. If you have like some lot coverage maximums, and I would say this is the most robust one we have, like Oceanside. it's a 50% lot coverage maximum. So if your lot is 5,000 square feet, you can cover 2,500 square feet of the lot. There's no measuring footprints in relation to setbacks and lot lines.
So all this it can be reviewed within our community plan and recommend, and changes could be recommended.
That's right. So one of the things I hear from the community the most is structures are covered. Like, we're not following the lot coverage requirements. We in permitting are not administering the lot coverage requirements. We are. And if you read that, and that this applies to every residential zone in Neskowin, this is how you do it. It's prescriptive of lot width, depth. And it doesn't include patios. It doesn't include other elements that become part of a home that cover the lot that one would assume are part of that. So that might be something the committee and the community want to think about. Is this working? I would say, based on the people I talked to, the answer is no. Does the community find this measurement still relevant? Should it be tweaked? I have used the Neskowin example in several communities who either don't have lot coverage or measure it just at that flat ratio rate. And they're like, these homes are too big for the lots. Well, this is how you say to measure it, right? So I think we're going to see some folks take more of your route for measuring with these code updates with 406.
Yeah, I would obviously
Mhm.
been involved with this up
Yeah.
on the knoll, where this became an issue and there was a variance and now appeal. But I think it's particularly when you get on the sloped properties,
Mhm.
and you have the impacts are different than say in the village. And so what ends up happening is you're really impacting not just adjacent property owners, but from afar as well, because everyone's looking up to the slow properties. And one of the key takeaways on that is the breathing room between the houses, the structure, right? And so, yes, there's 5 foot. So if you had 100-foot lots, right, and it's up on a slow property, you could have with the 5-yard setback, with the 5-foot setbacks, you could have a 90-foot long structure, which would be pretty imposing, elevated in the air versus the 70% requirement. Being an architect, it's challenging. And believe me, I've submitted plans and the county's rejected those because I was a little too creative in how I was
See,
analyzing it.
we do it.
And
Thank
so
you
so
for
I will
saying
say,
that.
they do it, and it's frustrating and challenging, but at the same time, it's just another little thing you put into your design book and work around. Because I think overall, it really is a benefit to the community because you do have that breathing room. And again, you're getting the same lot coverage as if it was a percentage of the lot, only you're getting a little more breathing room because you on the edges. And with the trees and the slopes, it's a big, it's a very creative, it's unique, but I think it is very effective as well.
So describe the setback from the street.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
also the right of way. So that's going, especially in the one part of the village, as the skinny street, the narrow streets, has my guess is there are utility right of ways and along, I'm not quite sure how that works. And what is the setback from the street and the right of way? I guess the utility right of way that you have to have.
All right. So yeah, let's talk about setbacks now. Okay.
And can that be changed?
Okay. So let's talk about definitions first. So the front yard is the shortest property line abutting a street or private way. That applies everywhere, all zones. Okay, so this is the street. This is the street. We're doing a whole block here, okay? I'm gonna show you some different things. And this is the street. Okay. So,
That poor lot in the middle, they're never gonna get out.
so these lots come out this way. So think about like Corvallis and all of your east-west running streets.
Yeah,
This is representative. Let's say this is Breakers, right?
yeah.
So then you've got two streets and let's say this is Hawk.
Oh, I see.
Okay, so we're gonna condense this. There's a lot more lots. in
I
here,
got it.
but We're
No,
gonna
I-
condense this.
I see
Okay.
what you do.
Everybody visualize this?
Yeah.
All right. Front. So we always start with the front. When I teach planners, I say, always find the front yard first. Because if you can find the front lot line and the front yard, you can figure out the rest. So it's the shortest property line abutting a street or private way. So in this case, we're gonna start with the easy ones. Front, right? Front, front. We have 4 corner lots. Start with this one. We have about a street here and a street here. Visually, it's obvious which one is the front, right? Because on a corner lot, it says, again, the shortest property line abutting the street or private way. So, here we go. In this case, we know. Okay. The rear, again, is the most distant and opposite to the front. So. Right? Distant and opposite. On a corner lot, because you have 2 streets, the other lot line becomes the street side. Does that make sense to everybody? Because you have, they're not just side yards, they're street side yards. They're special, we'll talk about those in a minute. And then all of these interior lot lines are side yards. Okay. So that's what this block would look like. For setback application, we're just gonna follow the Neskowin R1 zone. Okay, so everybody's homework, because you need to tell me when to stop, because we are approaching time. But how about if I wrap this up and then, okay, we're all gonna do, everybody's homework is to read your Neskowin zoning ordinances, okay? Okay, thank you. There will be no test. Just, but if you read them, it will help us come back.
So you go up
and-
and talk to you.
That's right, and I remember you from Neskowin. Okay,
Don't do that.
so. And then, so these are called interior lots. Because they're basically, there's a front, there's a rear, and 2 side yards. There's no street, there's no anything else. So in the R1 and most of your zones, you have a 20-foot front, a 20-foot rear, and 5 on each side. So you have to meet that, and then you also have that 70% lot coverage maximum for structures. Okay.
Sarah, are you sure it's 20-foot rear?
Yep.
I mean, I'm asking you.
Yep.
Sure, but it seems,
Yep, well, hang on, well, you know what, we're gonna talk about that next time, that's a teaser, all right. In the case of a corner lot, your front yard remains 20. Your rear goes down to 5 feet.
that's right.
Your side is still 5. And now your street side, right, your other where you're running the street is 15. So what it does is it takes your building envelope and pushes it back into the lot. With that, you have something called a clear vision area, which means for driver visibility, this has to remain unobstructed.
And the front is, the setback is from what line?
The property line. All setbacks are measured from property lines. They are not measured from easements. I'll say that one more time. Setbacks are measured from property lines. They are not measured from easements. So if Neskowin Water has an easement that goes here, right? For utility, access to utilities, that's a big deal. We're not measuring 20 feet from that. We're measuring 20 feet from the property line. So in this case, people would be okay because the setback actually is pushing them out of that easement. However, if the easement went in further than the setback, the building has to stay out of it. It can go right up to the line, but it can't be in it. So the thing with easements is you can't be in them. You can build right up to them, but you cannot be in them.
And does the county? So the county, it's again, go to the village, so the county has their county roads. There's a measurement of that road somewhere.
Usually 40 feet, all of your roads are between 40 and 50 feet wide.
And then is there anything beyond the 40 feet that the county owns as a, like ODOT has right of ways on either side of 101, right?
So, okay.
40 feet. Is that what it is for the ODOT?
Here's where people, and working with short-term license, short-term rental folks, this is coming up all the time. You have the road right of way. So this is the right of way. And it can be, most public roads are 40 feet wide, 50 feet wide. Highways are 100 feet wide. Port of Tillamook Bayville right of way is 100 feet. Roads vary between 40 and 50. Okay. And that applies to private roads as well. So like Sahali and others, when we review subdivisions, there's this prescribed minimum right of way width that a road has to be. And right up on those property lines are your lots. So oftentimes your property line and the boundary of the road right of way fall right on top of each other. But here's what trips everybody up. You ready? The travel surface of the road is typically 16 feet wide. Or in Neskowin, it can be 12 feet wide, right? So you have your travel surface here. This is what we all drive on. Sometimes it's up here. Sometimes it's down here. Wherever you see the travel surface does not mean it's in the center of the road right of way. Especially in Tillamook County, we have topography, right? So that 50 feet, maybe on a hill like this, and that right of way is right there. And what happens is that they cut out a little flat spot for you to drive on.
So you're saying that let's say the driving road in the village is 16 feet, but the property is still at a minimum 40 feet. And so the property line has to be behind or can abut that 40-foot.
That's correct.
Line.
So let me show you some scenarios.
Well, it'd be
for
interesting
to
to
take
go
home.
do some measuring.
Yes, so your second assignment, so your first assignment is to read your zoning ordinances. Your second assignment is to look in the village and see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because what happens is in some areas, because you have a lot of older homes, they're built here. Because this is what people are paying attention to. Or the home may be back here, meets setbacks, go through all those things that we talked about, but you need a driveway, right? You gotta have a paved surface or a gravel surface to get into the travel lane of the road. So people think this is theirs, but it's not. This is yours.
So that gets back to that driveway width begins at that spot.
Up here.
Reduces your property taxes.
And so here's the thing, and I'm not beating up on short-term rental license holders, it's just a really good example to use. Because when you build a home today, when you give me that site plan and I look at lot coverage and setbacks and all those things, I gotta measure from that property line. Right? But when you talk about short-term rental parking, a lot of rental owners don't realize this is on-street parking. Their property line is here. But if you look visually, it feels like this is yours because you're not thinking about this still being road right of way. This to you is the road right of way because that's what you drive on. Makes perfect sense. So a good indicator are utility poles. Utility poles are usually tucked right in or on the right-of-way line, which is your property line. So one of the easiest ways to identify where your front lot line might be is to look at the power poles.
So anyone can park in any of those places.
Well, you have to get on street parking verification now. But my point is that where the grass ends and the gravel or pavement begins does not mean that that's where your property line is. Your property line is back here. And you do have narrow roads. But you have 40-foot road right-of-ways. So at the end of the day, if not saying this to scare anybody, but the reality is all of these encroachments, which could include porches or other things that are in the road right of way, if Public Works ever had to come in and do some work, you're in the right of
So
way.
even though in a village that was platted, 1912 or whatever, did they have 40-foot right of ways?
Yeah. If you look at, so homework number 3, if you're uber ambitious, go look at the plats and the survey records. You'll see, it's all there. So on that note, unless you'd like to keep going, it is almost.
Well, obviously, that.
I don't want to burn everybody's out. Yeah, otherwise it's gonna take 1 or 2 meetings to get through this. But we talked about some big things today. We talked about lot coverage, which is one of the biggest things I hear from the community. We talked about property lines and how to measure your setbacks. Look at your zoning districts. Because again, it's not just about what you can do, it's about what your neighbors can do. And all of those were predetermined to have consistency with the comprehensive plan and your community plan. So we'll talk more about those uses next time. We'll get into building height measurements because those are super fun. I actually love Neskowin's building height methodology. It's one of the cleanest and easiest there is that we have. And I'm very appreciative of that. So I think, yeah.
Quick question, Sarah.
Yes.
Can you give just in a few words what the difference would be between R1 and R3 in terms of, or do you want to cover that next time?
I'm going to cover that next time, Nancy. So please come back.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a date for next time?
Do we have a date yet?
No, we have our own meeting of the subcommittee on the 29th. And then that's when we're planning the next meeting, because we didn't know if it could be all wrapped up or, not a chance. Okay, so we got our homework to do clearly also.
Yes, please.
We'll get you notice.
This was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You guys all have a nice night. Thank you for staying late.
I know we said everyone's name on the statement. It's already, I'd appreciate it. Just part of the public record.
This one's on X.